Welcome to Parish and Community. My special guest today is Sarah Fenske from St. Louis Public Radio. Thank you, Sarah, for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
So I've been reading up on you, and I learned in your bio that you've been in a variety of cities before you settled in St. Louis. So what brought you here?
Yeah, that is the understatement of the year. I've lived in a lot of places. So I was working as a journalist in Phoenix. I was writing a column. And at that point, I decided that there probably weren't going to be that many columnist jobs in newspapers in the future. I kind of saw the writing on the wall. This was back in 2010. And so the small chain that I worked for, I put my hat in the ring if they had any future editing positions, because I felt like people are always going to need editors. And so they said, yeah, we do need editors and you'll have to take this test. But if you can pass that, are you willing to move? We don't have any openings in Phoenix. And I didn't have any family in Phoenix. I liked my life in Phoenix, but I was open to moving. And so after I passed the test, they said, okay, how do you feel about St. Louis? And I had never been to St. Louis in my life. I had never thought about it. However, I was originally from the Midwest. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. And so I think they thought this might be kind of a homecoming. I had no desire to have a homecoming. I loved living out west. I was hoping they would send me to Seattle or San Francisco. But I said, okay, I will fly out and I'll take a look at St. Louis and we'll see. And after I flew out to St. Louis, I turned the job down. And then I ended up changing my mind, and they graciously agreed to let me change my mind.
Wow.
And so I would say it was not love at first sight at all, but I came out here for a job. I was the managing editor of the Riverfront Times, and I did that job for a year and 3 months. And then the same company called me and said, hey, we're going to promote you. You can be editor in chief, but you have to move. And I'm thinking, okay, where are they going to send me now? And that is when I moved to Los Angeles. So,
wow.
But the reason that I ended up in St. Louis here is that in my year and 3 months of living in St. Louis, I met a St. Louis man. And as this often happens with St. Louis men, you can convince them to leave St. Louis, but they will always make you go back. And so this St. Louis man, he's actually a St. Louis University graduate. He went to your seminary there, actually. And he hated California. So we were in LA for a while and he wanted to move back home. And thank goodness that we did, because his mother has been invaluable. We started a family very soon after moving back to St. Louis. And so we've been here ever since. When was that? That was in 2015 or 2014. We moved back here. So,
okay. Yeah. Well, that's great. And
long story.
you mentioned Riverfront Times,
Yeah.
Which leads me to ask about, the difference between print media and radio now that you're on St. Louis on the Air, the host there, the differences, the comparison and contrast I'm wondering about with journalism. There's I'm sure different permutations of journalism in each medium. Talk us about that.
Yeah, so I spent 20 years in newspapers, and I've only been in radio for less than 2 years at this point. So just take everything I say about radio with a grain of salt. I do think that the same thing is paramount for both. It's all about good storytelling. And so a story that's a good story, it's going to work for radio. It's going to work for print. The biggest difference is in radio, we have to draw it out of people. We have to get people to say it. And in print, what I really loved is the writer can think about things and the writer can come to a lot more conclusions. And so you might weave in a couple of quotes, but sometimes when I was writing long form stories, 6,000 words, there might be 800 words of that was someone else talking, and the rest was me scene setting. And, you could really ruminate on some stuff. And on the air, if you can't get someone to say it, it's going unsaid.
Right. Sure.
And that's tough. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's really interesting. I wouldn't have thought about that, but that makes a lot of sense. Otherwise the areas between the quotes are just dead air.
Yeah, so there's some limitations with the medium. Now, that said, it can be great. I mean, you're getting a chance to hear people in their own words, and with the right guest, a guest who can explain things well, it's so much better than hearing something filtered through my ruminations. However, if you're doing an investigation or something like that, where you really need that strong author's voice, there's a reason that is historically something that print publications have done better.
That's true. Now I've seen it come into kind of the at least podcast realm, and of course there's programs like Reveal that do that investigative, but usually they have a great many stories, and of course you're doing a daily show, so it's harder to marshal all those resources for something like that.
Yeah, and I think it's great the way radio is really sort of pushing the limits, as you say, with that podcast format. People aren't just doing, let me throw questions at you and let the tape just run forever. You know, people are being very smart about the way they will edit that in and do the storytelling. And, you know, there are some limitations with live radio. And we've tried to push the envelope on that. We don't want it to just necessarily be two people talking. But I think the most important thing in a story you're writing for print is the voice of the author. The most important thing in a radio interview is having a great guest.
Yeah, right.
You know, if there's somebody who's agreed to come on my show and that person is interesting and knowledgeable, that's going to be a great hour of radio. If it's a terrible guest, they don't know what they're talking about, they don't have direct experience, they're just speaking in cliches. I could ask great questions, although sometimes I don't know that I'd even do that, but I say I could ask the best questions in the world. It's still going to be terrible radio. It's just,
right,
you know.
Right.
So much of it comes down to the booking in radio.
Well, that's a good segue into like, walk us through the sausage factory of it. Like I know nothing about how a program like St. Louis on the Air gets put together, and you have a whole team of producers, you've got an engineer. How does all of it happen? How does it work?
Yeah, so I got a crash course in this all about 2 years ago. It's pretty interesting. So there are three or four producers on this team. One includes the executive producer of the show, who basically just manages things. But the producers are each coming up with their own ideas. I'm also a producer on the show, so I come up with my own ideas. And we pitch them to the group and try to sell each other. And so I'll say, here's an example. Just now the mayor chose, she appointed a new director of the St. Louis Development Corporation. That's a job that's going to have a big impact on the future of the city. And so immediately when I saw this news, I said, we need to get this guy in. I've met him before. He's a really interesting, smart person. I want to hear his vision for this. So sometimes a pitch is that simple. It's just a paragraph. And the team says, that's great. Of course we should have this guy on. Sometimes it's a lot more complicated. I might say, I've got this wild idea. I want to do this really complicated thing. I want to talk to people in this field, and people will say, okay, well, who's the best guest to speak to that? Like, you have a topic, who should be the guest? So then we'll argue about that. And people might say, okay, you're approaching it from this angle. Have you thought about, this is actually the community affected. You know, you don't want the expert coming in. You want somebody who's living in this community, things like that. And so we spend a lot of time going back and forth, trying to fine tune what might start somewhat general to get it to, okay, who is the person that we want to sit and talk to? And do we want to talk to them for 8 minutes, which is about as short as we go, or do we want to talk to them for the entire hour?
Right.
And so we're working through, and you know, should there be a second guest? Is there meant to be another voice in this conversation? Do we want some pre-taped comments from somebody where we don't want them in for the whole time, but their perspective is necessary to fully understand what this person's going to talk about? And so what the producers are doing is trying to figure out how to take it from a topic to, here's the actual conversation in all of its forms, and here's how we're going to fit it into this format we have, where it's going to run for about 54 minutes and have 2 breaks in it. So that's the fun part, I think.
Yes. It's a high wire act, and it's got to be complicated to figure out. You touched on this a little bit, but if you could expand a little on, because an hour is not a lot of time, especially if it's like one guest. So how do you prioritize? What do you take into consideration when you're thinking about what stories to bring forward in the whole St. Louis metropolitan region, and what stories just don't get told?
Yeah, and it's, you know, we try to be so aware of our blind spots, but we all have blind spots. And so I'm interested in politics. I'm interested in the law. I like to talk about court cases. And so frequently what I'm pitching is going to be one of those two things. I also love author interviews. And so if there's a book that has even the most tenuous St. Louis connection, you can bet that I'm like trying to sell the team. You know, we need to talk to this author. I'm always fangirling about that. And so each of the producers has their particular things that they're really interested in. And I think that where it gets complicated is trying to figure out what are the gaps between our areas of interest? What is it that's not getting covered because nobody's obsessed with it, you know? And a lot of times they will have to talk me into things that I feel like I'm not as knowledgeable about. For example, I feel really dumb sometimes about science. And so they'll be like, look, we have to talk about this. This is important. And, you know, we're going to find a guest who can guide you through this. And I'm going, guys, like, are you sure? Can we stick to the stuff I'm confident in? And so they're trying to work through my weaknesses. And we're trying to work through our blind spots. And hopefully in trying to be cognizant of that, at the same time that we're also pursuing the stuff we're really excited about, a show kind of takes shape. And so each show has generally 2 to 3 different segments on it. And things kind of come together ad hoc, but we're hoping that over the course of the week, we're sort of weaving a tapestry that speaks to St. Louis in this moment. And while you might have one show where it doesn't have that balance of topics or have that balance of guests, over time, we hope that we're doing that. And some weeks we do better than others. You know, there's some weeks we'll look back on our guest list and we're like, wow, that was a lot of white men. Like, what, you know, whose voice were we missing here? And how can we correct for that next week?
Yeah, because it is cumulative. It's a tapestry. Then if it's every day, it's like print journalism in that, because there's always fresh stories that are bubbling up. So
yeah, and part of what I like about it is every day we're kind of throwing something at the wall and we're looking to see what sticks. And when the day is over, when the noon hour is over, if it wasn't the greatest hour of radio, you know what, we try again tomorrow. We move on, you know?
Yeah, you get a fresh start.
Yeah, and if we have a week where we did not capture what was important in St. Louis, like, we don't linger on that. It's not like this is a book where we've sunk a year of reporting into it. There's going to be another day and we'd better do better the next day. So.
Got it. Now, over time, what have you found, have there been aspects of St. Louis that have come clearer to you over time as you've been delving out into all of these stories? Or have there been other aspects that have become more complex the more you delve into them?
I think, honestly, the thing that you learn when you're a full-time journalist is that the more you dig into anything, the more you realize it's so complicated. People are complicated. Their motivations are complicated. Questions of what is the right thing to do are often more complicated than we want to admit on first tack. Sometimes it's super simple. I don't mean to say everything, you know, all questions of morality are complicated, but, you know, the unforeseen consequences, the thing where somebody goes in with good intentions and then does harm, you know, all those things are so complicated. And I think part of what became very hard for me when I was writing full time is I became aware of all the things I thought were simple when I was young aren't simple at all. And it really bothered me to have to put out a story and to say, this is the final word on this. And I'm sitting in judgment. And I like that the on-air conversation is a little more open-ended. I like that we're introducing our audience to people and they're getting to hear those people in their own words. And there maybe, my goal is, my hope is that they're coming away with some understanding of how these people think and why they think what they think. And that maybe they come away realizing things are more complicated, but that they're not reacting in anger, that they're reacting with a sort of empathy where for that 10 minutes or 50 minutes, they're walking a mile with that person and they can understand, even though it is complicated, they can understand a little bit more about that person's perspective on this complicated issue. So I like that. So everything I think is infinitely complicated. St. Louis is so complicated, being an outsider here, the fact that, you know, 10 years ago, I'd never even been here. It's shocking to me that St. Louis has trusted me to get to do this job. And I feel so lucky in that. And I just don't want to let St. Louis down. So I try to be mindful of how little I know every single day. Like, that's the one abiding principle is I'm coming in and hopefully being a voice for the audience who doesn't know as much, because I don't, and let's face it, we don't. Even people who've grown up here, they haven't had time to study it as much as I've had time to study it, you know, in this intense couple years. And so I hope sometimes I hope that ignorance can be a strength.
Right, because you can see it through fresh eyes, perhaps, and not have some of the preconceived notions that are coming into it. Well, you guys have something special coming up June 30th, right?
Yeah, I did want to mention this. So we're going to have, it's not St. Louis on the air in the courtyard, but if you're familiar at all with where our office is, we're right next to KETC Channel 9. The PBS station is right there and we're right there. very close to the church, actually.
Yeah, right
And
there on
so,
Olive.
yeah. So on June 30th, we're going to do, we're going to ask some questions to a musician, and the musician is also going to perform. And we're going to have a bar, and we're going to just invite anybody who listens to the show, if they want to pop by and listen to this musician and listen to the conversation. And we'll also talk just a little bit about, you know, the show during the pandemic, now that we're inviting guests back in. Like, here's what it's been like in the last year. So it should just probably be an hour event, but we're hoping it'll be fun. And so if you keep your eyes open, we're going to start pushing information on that in the next couple of weeks, and it'll be the evening of June 30th, which I believe is a Wednesday. So
I will make sure to have the link to the St. Louis Public Radio website on this interview in the comments section, so people can check that out.
yeah,
Sarah,
that would be great.
thank you so much for your time today. It's been really a pleasure. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's fun to be on the other side here. You ask good questions. So
Thank you.
thanks.